uh, the wild authentication. I think in the morning, Gavin already introduced you about the wireless authentication. So in the switch, we can also to make the authentication. Um, for example, we just take some scenario as an example. The first main application scenario is the switch supports the wild authentication. Because some user they connect to the switch and they want and their requirement it's about the edge access security. So with the wild authentication from Sundray, it can support Portal and 802.1x authentication to meet this kind of requirements. And also, it can provide different type of access scheme for different people. For example, the financial department they connected to the switch and they need to use the password to log into the internet and for the R&D team they connected to the switch but they need to use another kind of authentication methods to authenticate. So for different people we just give them different authentication methods. The third is according to the characteristics of the different type of terminal. So with the different terminal, we can also to provide the various types of access solution. For example, the PC, we can use the account authentication or certificate authentication. And for the dump terminal, such as the printer or the camera, we just allow it to connect to the internet directly. No need authenticate, right? So this is for the scenario one. The next is about the scenario two. For the wild authentication, we can support multi-vendor equipment networking. How to understand this? Because our advantage, you can support the same portal authentication for AP of the different manufacturer. For example, in an project, there are many other brands, but actually for the other brands, they use the other brands controller and other brands access points. And the capital portal server in but they want to make the capital portal. So how to achieve this? Well, we can use our Sundry smart switch. So when the other access point they connect to our Sundry Sundry switch, for example, and we enable the wild authentication in our switch. For example, the Sundry smart switch, the port one, we enable the web authentication. And for this port, it's a PoE switch, and for this port, it connect to the other brand's access point. So when the user they connect to the Wi-Fi of this access point, but actually when the data transfer from the terminal to the access point, and then the access point will try to send this data to the switch to the wired connection. We said that we can support to make the unified authentication with the other brands. So how to make it? Because when we use the other brand access point to transfer the data, at the finally the data will be sent in the wild connection. So we can use Sundray controller and Sundray switch to make the wild authentication. So when the user data will send to the Sundray switch to the port, we enable the wild authentication, and then the user can get the captive portal page from the Sundray controller. So it can combine with the other brand access points to do the authentication. And the next is to support the connection of existing authentication server and the account database. It means we can dock our authentication with the account database. For example, the Windows AD Active Directory, or LDAP, or Oracle database. So we can use the account and the password in the database to authenticate. The main application scenario 3 is the wild and wireless integration. For this one, our advantage is the first is the unified authentication. No matter where the terminal is connected, whether it's a wild connection or the wireless connection, it can all have the captive portal page, and the captive portal page is the same. So second is the terminal. Second is we can make the terminal free of authentication, and the wireless wild network is universal, because for the wild and the wireless authentication, after it passes the authenticate, we use the role to manage it. So we just need to configure the access control policy once, and then we use the role to call this policy, and the role we can assign to the wireless user or to the wild user. So this is the unified authentication. As the present, the wild authentication support by our switch can be based on the ports or the VLAN. So the wild authentication based on the VLAN still need to select the port, because the VLAN is combined with the port, and to select the VLAN under the selected port need to be authenticated. And it also can based on the port. The devices connect to this port need to authenticate. Here it's a note for the fight mode switch. It doesn't support the wild authentication, because with the wild authentication you need captive portal server, and actually in Sundray controller we have integrated the captive portal server, but for the standalone mode it's not managed by the controller, right? So it cannot do the wild authentication. Only when we change the fight mode switch to the fate and use the controller to manage it, and then we can make the wild authentication. For the wild authentication, there is two types. The first is wipe authentication, and second is 802.1x authentication. So for the wipe authentication, the switch intercepts the internet traffic, mainly HTTP or HTTPS, passing through the port, and redirects the authentication page after matching the condition, and provides the multiple authentication methods for the user of the traffic. This same with the wireless authentication. How to configure it? The first, we go to the switch management center. At the application center, we can go to the switch management center. And the second, we add in the switch management center, in switch management, wild interface authentication, we can to new edit authentication policy. And in the policy, we can choose the authentication scope, whether it's based on the port or based on the VLAN. For example, we choose based on the VLAN, and then, oh, for example, we choose to authenticate based on the port, and then we just to edit which ports need to enable the wild authentication policy. And then we choose the web authentication to the wipe authentication. For the user and the guest authentication, we need to add a internal or external capital portal server. So for example, we use the wipe the internal capital portal server. It's inside in the controller. And for the web authentication, if we have not created the web authentication policy before, at this time we need to add web authentication policy, just new. For example, the client name here is Sundray. We added the web authentication policy. After we added the web authentication policy, here we can choose guest or account authentication. Just choose the methods. And for the capital portal, it can support customize. I think Gavin already told that already explained that for the customize of capital portal page, right? And actually here it's the same. We just need to upload some pictures and then to customize. And then for the web authentication policy, we use the after we create it, and then we go to the authentication. We go to we choose the user account authentication and configure the user account database. As I said, the Sundray can support the outside the external authentication server. For example, the Radius, LDAP, and the Oracle database, the MySQL database, etc. And then we configure whether after authenticate which role will be assigned to the terminal, and there is some advanced settings there to redirect or configure the MAC address or configure the endpoint authentication. For here, if we enable the restrict endpoint from connecting to the WLAN based on the MAC address, the client blacklist, and then we choose the blacklist group. So all the MAC address in the blacklist cannot connect to, cannot access to the internet. For the whitelist, we can put it in the MAC-based open authentication. For the 802.1x authentication, here is one customer scenario. The customer is a school site and want to see the user information in real time, and needs to be built by time when access to the wild campus network. This one usually used for the university, and the it doesn't want to allow the wireless be shared devices uh, to access to the wired network. So how we can meet the requirements of this customer? Our solution is to use Sundray RS switch and to make the X0 2.1 authentication. And also we can enable the terminal type banding on the ports. So only the laptop can allow to access. If you use the desktop or if you want to connect a router to the switch, it will be not possible. For the advantage, the user's data is intuitive and you can see user information directly on the web page and prohibits the network from being shared. Also, for the graphical configuration, it's simple to configure. Okay, the next is about the configuration. How to configure this kind of wild authentication. The first, we need to new add it is a 802.1x authentication policy. Here for the guest VLAN, this is the user in this VLAN doesn't need to authenticate. They can access to the internet directly. But this is optional. For example, the VLAN 10. If we if the user they they connect to the VLAN 10 because the user now in the guest VLAN, so it can access to the internet directly. The second is the same. It's the terminal verification. We can choose the devices in the blacklist and the whitelist, whether to block it or just allow it to access to the internet without authentication. The to control the terminal access through black and white list, and to specify the terminal which doesn't need to be authenticated. And then we also need to select the authentication server. As I showed before, for the authentication for the external authentication server, we can support the Windows 80 domain, the Radius, and Oracle database, MySQL, MS SQL, etc. And actually, in the China mainland, we also can support the Sun4 Packet Assistant server and the WeChat Enterprise account server. After we select the server, next we can configure the authorization. We can choose whether to be authorized by the administrator, or we can self-service authorization, or not configure here. You can authenticate by yourself with this config. For the next is we configure the post authentication VLAN and post authentication terminal roles. It means when you pass the authentication successfully, and then what VLAN and what kind of a role you can get. Next is about configure the advanced option. For example, if for this customer, because they want to do the billing, and then they can here to input the accounting server, accounting server information.